Hello, Primetime Entrepreneur listeners. I'm Jamil Glenn, and today we have a very special guest. Before I introduce her, I want to talk about this podcast a little bit, give some references to this podcast and the initiative that's happening right now. All through the news, there is a process that's happening. There is a movement that's happening. You heard about Elizabeth Warren and the concept of reducing or eliminating student debt. So some lawmakers and change agents feel that student loan is crippling this country. And I can tell you personally that a story that I wanted to kind of give before I introduced our guest here today. So early in my 30s, I had a son, then I had another son, and I realized I had to go back to school. When I went back to school, to get a good job, I had to, acquire student loans to be able to get through school. So after 4 years of going through school, I accumulated over $60,000 in student loan debt. And with a growing family, and it took about 2 or 3 years for me to even make $60,000 a year to start really paying back my student loan debt. And what happened was, to me, when I went to go buy a house or I needed unsecured loans, my debt to income ratio was upside down. So I was a non-viable borrower to banks. And I couldn't borrow any money, and I couldn't buy a house, even though I didn't have a lot of debt, but I had $60,000 in student loan debt, which made it almost impossible for me to get a mortgage or unsecured loans. I feel, and the reason I wanted to do this podcast today and talk to this tremendous attorneys out in Florida, because I feel that this is a story that most Americans deal with all the time. And I feel as though that there has to be some type of process, there has to be some type of forgiveness, or there has to be something that can be done with student loans. I'm not quite sure what that is. I am not a lawmaker or a change agent in this field, but I do feel as though that there has to be something that we can do. So I want to introduce our guest today, Christie Arkovich. She's a Florida attorney with more than 25 years. Her law firm is focused on reducing student loan debt to something that is sustainable and with an end in sight. She's a frequent speaker at various consumer-oriented legal education seminars, American Bankruptcy Institute, the National Association of Consumer Advocates, and the Tampa Bay Bankruptcy Bar Association, where she also writes a column called The Student Loan Sidebar. So I'd like to welcome Christie Arkovich. How are you doing today? Thank you so much for joining. I'm sure this is going to be a great podcast for my listeners.
Oh, thank you, Jamel. I hope that we can provide some insights today, and maybe some of your listeners can help reduce their student loans.
Awesome. So I'm sure you're aware of this movement that's happening with the student loan debt that they're tickling Biden to to cancel or do something with. So I wanted to kind of just jump right in here. So there obviously is a growing consensus in the United States to cancel student loan debt. I want to know what your thoughts are about that.
Sure. It's a long time coming. The borrower defense program for fraudulent schools like Everest and Corinthian, that's a good example of how our system has gone awry. Those schools existed for a number of years. We've got clients who have filed borrower defense applications, 5 years ago, and they still don't have responses. The Department of Ed is very, very busy dealing with all the different problems that student loans create for them. And so I don't know if you knew this, but the Department of Education is actually the largest bank in the United States.
I didn't.
No, and they weren't meant to be. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the people, the personnel. And so we really need to move back to privatize some of this system. I think that would help. One of the biggest problems about how we got to where we are is that the government took too much control. They basically, with the direct loan program, made all federal loans guaranteed or originated and owned by the government since 2010. And that's been a little over 10 years now. And you just have a lot of problems with having the government control so much of the loans, because what the schools did is they would keep continuing to raise tuition. I mean, you've probably heard stories out there where tuition's gone up 800% in the last, however many years, where most expenses maybe went 10, 20% over that same time period. So it really wasn't equal by any means. And so redoing the system to hold everyone accountable would be good. Because right now, you mentioned you're not a change agent, but raising awareness as to the problem that exists and potentially how to fix it sort of makes you, a thought leader and a change agent in this area. And holding those accountable, the schools, the servicers, the lenders. Right now, our system holds the borrowers accountable. If you default on a student loan, the borrower is the one that gets the brunt of that problem, the taxpayer next. No one holds the school accountable. Nobody holds the lender or the servicer accountable. And that's what I'd like to see changed.
And do you think that that's a possibility to transition into that kind of mindset to start holding those other institutions responsible for this?
Actually, it is. And I've started to see that happen. And it's not something that's being covered by the press very much. For instance, there's this thing called preemption. And it's basically where the higher education law, a federal law, preempts any state consumer laws. So if I ran around and wanted to sue a servicer for misrepresenting something, I arguably couldn't because I'm preempted from doing so. They just changed that about 2 weeks ago. They reversed their policy, the Department of Ed. Now they're allowing their servicers to be held accountable. Another thing that's changing, there's a fresh start to bankruptcy bill that was introduced to Congress, a bipartisan thing last month or so. We don't know, what's going to happen with that bill, but one of the pillars of the bill is that they're going to hold a school accountable to where they would get knocked down somehow if they had too many students getting a discharge in bankruptcy of their student loans. And so that's holding them accountable. So we're starting to see this, but neither of those things are getting a lot of press. We also don't know, to the extent in that fresh start bill, how are they going to notify the school? Does the school get a voice? Will they have the option to appear to say, yeah, but? So it's very early in the stages to try to do that, but I am seeing movements to start.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm sure people would love to hear that. My second question is, I know a lot of people kind of coattail the news and coattail articles, and a lot of the media don't really don't give the full story about what's happening with this movement with cutting or eliminating student loan debt. And I know that when I read the stories or read about Elizabeth Warren or this executive action that Biden can take to cancel student loan debt, I was wondering if you can give some thought to, or let my audience know about, if this were to happen, let's say this magical thing were to happen, would this happen for all Americans or would this be just for select Americans? I started to notice there was student loan debt cut for certain people that went to this college, or certain people went to this college. We have this disability, so they're kind of widening the actual the audience that can actually eliminate it. But would this happen for everybody across the board, or would that never happen?
Sure. Well, there's two things being discussed. One is universal student loan forgiveness across the board, so it would apply equally to everyone. I know that President Biden has been supportive of a $10,000, relatively small. He wants it to be approved by Congress. Elizabeth Warren, as you mentioned, is looking more towards 50,000, and she probably will be pushing executive action. Myself, my belief is that, I believe we need to have a student loan system. I wouldn't be a lawyer if it wasn't for a student loan system. I had no money. My parents had no money. And so you need the system. If you destroy the system, then nobody's going to college. So, I do think that it has a value. I think that I'd like to see them focus on fixing the problem areas. So while you mentioned that it might be unfair that someone with a disability or someone that went to a specific school, that they get relief and maybe someone else doesn't, but in effect, what they're trying to do is fix the problems that have occurred. For instance, with our fraud schools, like if you've gone to ITT Tech or Corinthian or Everest, generally that school has made a misrepresentation and someone has relied upon it to their detriment. They took out all these loans and they were never able to get a job. So you hear a lot of people out there that say, well, you signed a contract, you're bound, you got to pay this money back. It's unfair to everyone else if you don't. Otherwise, you're getting a free education, right? If you get this written off. But I analogize it to this, and this is usually a winning argument. Let's say you go to a car lot, you buy a car. It never works. It's still up on blocks. It's still on the car lot. That's exactly what these degrees are like. If you go to one of these schools where an employer says, leave that off your resume, it's not helping you get a job. It actually hurts you to put that on there. Then yes, you have an education, but what's it worth? It never left the block. It never left the car lot. It's still up on blocks. So that person can never really be made whole. Yes, you can reinstate their federal entitlement to get more loans, but they have to redo that 4 years. Now they have to do it in a time period where maybe it's 10 years later. They've lost all that money they could have made in the meantime. Maybe they don't have the time or family, availability, commitments wise to do it now. So you're never really making that person whole. What you're trying to do is just not set them up for a lifetime of being sort of an indentured servant and simply working for your loans. So I do think that they do need to be forgiven for those that are most deserving, whether they're folks with disabilities, like for instance, disability. I had a client this week who she went to medical school. She was in a very severe car accident her last year. She actually graduated. I don't really know how, but she did. She had 300, 400 some $1,000s of debt. She's never able to work as a doctor. She can't walk, she can sit, but there's issues as to how long she can. So she can't even really work remotely very well. And she doesn't have the kind of experience to write books and do other things. She doesn't have that background. So to her, she's never going to earn that kind of money. Even if she had made the analysis of looking at it as an investment when she first started school, it certainly wasn't by the time she had the accident and so forth. So is she deserving of relief? I think she is. Is the person who can't drive their diploma off the lot, are they deserving of relief? I think they are. So I'd like to see them focus on public servants, who aren't getting the relief. They're working public service, but they have the wrong loan type. The servicers don't bother to tell them that. And they've worked 10 years, they apply and they're denied. I think those are the people that we should focus on. I do agree to some extent that it'd be nice if it was across the board, but to be fair, then you would be helping folks who maybe have great jobs. Maybe they're making $100,000 a year. Do they really need a write-off of another 50K? I don't know. So I don't know if there's a right answer, but I am happy to see them fix some of the problems that we've known exist for years. And we're really happy to see them start to be fixed now.
That's awesome. Thank you for that insight. So I just want to just circle back here. You do not think that this state or countrywide cancellation of student debt is going to happen for everybody?
No, I think they may do a 10,000 across the board. I don't think they'll do anything more than that.
Okay. So I guess my next question is, in terms of the economy, what is the barrier or what are the negatives to canceling, even at $10,000 student loan debt?
Sure. Really just a disincentive. Basically, again, it's the taxpayers who would be supporting that. And I'd like to see instead servicers or schools or lenders be held accountable for creating the default situation in the first place. Most people who need that $10,000 write-off, many of them, they went to an overpriced school. They didn't know of certain options. Like we run across everybody. They're in an income-driven plan, right? That's the way you deal with federal loans, is you go on an income-driven plan. Well, many of them don't know to take advantage of those programs for years because their servicers are pushing forbearance. You call them up, the servicer very quickly gets someone off the phone by saying, oh, you have zero payment, you have a hardship. In reality, having them sign up for an income-driven plan would have been better because they still would have the zero payment, but they'll have forgiveness at the end. So you want to incentivize good behavior and disincentivize bad behavior. Mm-hmm. So if you do an across the board kind of resolution like that, you have someone who gets a little bit of relief, but 10,000, honestly, a lot of our clients, they owe 50,000 or more. 10,000 is not really going to do a lot for them.
I think I should be one of your clients, actually.
Yeah. You have 60, right? You have 60. You're right in that window of what we usually talk about. So is it really going to do a lot? It's going to look good. The taxpayer is going to have a big chunk, but nobody's going to be held accountable. There's no changes. So what good did we really do? Right. I'd rather see those with, $200,000 of debt that they have no certainty of ever repaying it. They've never had the benefit of education. I'd like that entire 200,000 to be wiped, but not across the board for everyone.
So I guess, and I'm just looking for the average borrower here, which probably is, a large percentage of the country. Even at that $10,000, there's really no real positive to that. If somebody's sitting at $60,000, it drops down to $50,000. Is it?
Well, I do think that 10,000 would help a certain group of individuals. I read somewhere that about a third of those folks who only owed 10,000 were in default. So between you and I, if we only had a debt of 10,000 owed to the federal government, we'd probably just pay it off if we had the means. So someone who's in default on that, they have no means. They're usually, rock salt. They're usually at the bottom barrel right now. And if 30% of them are in default, then that's unnecessarily hurting your credit. So I do think the 10,000 for those folks will be enormous because it will clean up their credit, get them back up on their feet. That's great. And they need that, I think. But across the board for everyone, that's where, I don't know if that's really going to do anything to help that individual and to help us get back on our feet. It's kind of like the stimulus checks. Everybody gets what, 1,200, 1,400,
Right.
Across the board. Yes, that stimulated spending. So if we did that kind of thing, $10,000 write-off, it probably would stimulate spending. If that's our goal, then that would be good. If our goal is to change the system, then of course it doesn't really do anything.
Right. I wanted to jump in a little bit to your firm because I find it really interesting. This is the first time I've ever heard of a firm, bankruptcy, divorce, that kind of
Yeah.
specialize in this space. And I wanted you to kind of give my listeners how you help people with people like me that have like 60,
Great.
$50,000 of student loan debt.
Well, I'm glad you asked because we are a little bit of an unknown. There is a thing as a student loan attorney, but most bar agencies or organizations around the country, they don't have a special designation as student loan attorney. And even nowadays, when I'm trying to find co-counsel in another state to work with us on something, it's very hard to find a student loan attorney. There's just not that many around. But that's what I call myself. And that's where most of my efforts are. I have a little bit more insight because I actually used to work for the other side. I used to represent Sallie Mae and things like that back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I'm just consumer oriented now. But how we help folks is we add transparency, number one. Most people, when they come to see us, they don't really know what they have and how bad it is. I mean, they know it's bad. They know that they graduated, it was 30,000 and now it's 90,000. They've been making payments all this time, but they're not making any headway. So we kind of open their eyes as to how everything works, the differences with the loans, the different options they might have available. And I think that's important because the servicers are usually the people they're getting their information from, and the servicers don't represent the borrower, they represent the creditor. So
Right.
you might think, yeah, and a good example of that is we had a client, she actually came to my office. Her relative, when she was visiting in Florida, we have everybody come down to go to the beaches and stuff. So her relatives were down here and they took one day off from the beach and they came to my office because she wanted to see what I had to say about her student loans. And so this woman was in her early 60s and she was making a payment of $1,400. She had a Parent Plus loan for her daughter. Her daughter went to like a New York ballet school and was never able to get good enough employment to repay the loan. And so she's paying $1,400 and she thinks that that's all she can do. She calls her servicer. Her servicer is very kind. They answer the phone quickly. There's not a long hold time. They're very nice to her. They haven't, she thinks everything's fine. So she comes to me and within about 5 minutes, I can get her down to a zero payment legally. All we do is we change her loan type so that she's eligible for something new. We then apply for that something new and we have her file a separate tax return from her husband because she's a part-time bookkeeper at her husband's business. So we can do that. And all legal. It took me 5 minutes. And so I wrote a blog about that. And there was this particular servicer had a blue banner across their website. And the banner says, "Don't pay anyone for help. We're here to help you for free." But what was the true cost of that help? I mean, she spent $1,400 for however many months it was until she saw me. And then we reversed that real quick. So they get their information from servicers. And so I like to, pull back the curtain a little bit, let people know how they truly can take control of their student loans. So we've got an e-guide on our website, how to take your life back from your student loans. We have a YouTube series called Student Loan Sidebar that I'm focusing on stimulus, so 5-minute videos based on specific topics as stimulus rolls out. And a lot of the stimulus, we're doing all kinds of things now in the last few months that wouldn't have been possible earlier during the Trump administration. And they're not part of the student loan bill. So we don't need Congress. We can do a lot of this stuff without Congress. Yes, it'd be great if they do something massive at some time, but we don't need it. We're seeing it happen now. So we do litigation, we do some bankruptcy stuff, we do some settlement stuff. Right now, the two things that are working the best are our disability apps. We've streamlined that. We have a physician that meets with clients in our office or by Zoom. And those fraud applications that I mentioned, those are working really well. And so those are the two areas we're focused on right now. And we don't need Congress for either one of those.
That is amazing. That is amazing. I'm sure that a particular client of yours was extremely happy to change the
Yeah.
payment types.
Yeah.
I wanted to paint a bigger picture, and I was wondering if you had another success story like that, because these are the type of things I don't think people know about. I have a friend right now, and I have two examples for you. I have a friend right now who has about over $80,000 in student debt. She makes about $35,000 a year. And I don't know why, but she says every time I talk to her, she says I pay about $1,000, $1,100 a month in student loans, and it kills her. She can barely pay her rent. It kills her.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
just not too long ago on my credit report, I remember I forget who the servicer was, but the servicer was listed about 9 times on my credit report. So there was like it looked like it was 9 different loans on my credit report. So I was late one time on one of my payments. So it showed 9 different late.
9. Yes.
So I was talking to somebody like, well, just consolidate the loan. I had no idea about like how to, that you can consolidate the loan or whatever the case was, but I consolidated it. And then, obviously all that stuff was taken care of, but I just don't think people have the education to understand what their rights are when it comes to student loans. And I find it amazing that there are people out there like you to do that. So I was wondering if you can create another, or not create, but tell another story about how your firm was able to help somebody.
Yeah, one we had last month, I thought of when you mentioned during the introduction that you were trying to buy a house, right?
Mhm.
And so, and we talked with a client about this today. Basically, when you're trying to buy a home, if you're in forbearance, and that includes a COVID forbearance, the mortgage underwriter is required to use 1% of your principal balance. This particular client owed $188,000. So that means that their assumed payment would be $1,880, right? $1,800. And so they were denied. But if we put them on an income-driven plan, or if they're on an income-driven plan and their payment 0, we put them on extended fixed. Either way, we can then get them into a house. So we've had some great success stories with houses. One interesting thing that happened last month, though, was when you default on a federal student loan, there's only 2 ways to cure that default. One is consolidation to a direct loan, and the other is rehab. Well, there are people who have already done both. They may not know it. They talked to their servicer and they did it, but they didn't really realize what they were doing. Just like Monopoly, I call those the get out of jail cards, that consolidation and rehab. And so once they're gone, you can't do them anymore. So we had a client that he'd used those cards. He was behind. And so we put him in a Chapter 13. This was a bankruptcy option. We don't always file bankruptcy. In fact, it's very rare that we do for student loans, but we can. And so our bankruptcy wasn't to get rid of the federal student loan. Our client made $100K. That wasn't going to be a possibility, but it was just merely to cure the default. So we cured it in bankruptcy. That's allowed. Department of Ed doesn't believe that. They think that you can't do it that way. Well, my judge can tell them that it's done. And so it took a little bit of phone calls at the end, but our client was able to buy a house because his negative default information was removed from CAVERS, which is the system that the mortgage underwriter looks for. So you may hear from clients or people now that they've already tried to work with their loans. They've used their opportunities to cure the loan. Unless they use a student loan attorney to tell them there's this other way, they'll just be in lifetime garnishment and they wouldn't qualify for the house. So I particularly like that case because the Department of Ed said you can't do it. The AUSA, Assistant U.S. Attorney, said you can't do it. Bankruptcy judge, nope, I can do it.
That's amazing. That's amazing, because I was always under the consideration that bankruptcy was never an option for any type of student loan issue. Like you just would never.
We use it for certain things. Like here in the Middle District, in Florida, our district is kind of long. It goes all the way from Jacksonville down to Fort Myers. It includes Orlando and Tampa. And so it's the 3rd largest district in the country. And so we got our judges early on to understand, hey, if you have private loans, there aren't much options out there. And if you have federal loans, the Department of Ed just puts them in forbearance when you file a bankruptcy. Well, then you have a $100,000 debt that turns into $150 at the end. I maybe fix the car, fix the house, fix the credit cards, but I screwed the client over for student loans. So we got the judges to understand that. And so our judges have agreed to create a student loan management program, first one in the nation. There is no other like it. And so other courts now are starting to adapt something similar. They might do little tweaks here and there, but they're starting to recognize, hey, we can't just ignore student loans when someone files bankruptcy. We need to make sure that that we communicate to the borrowers, the debtors, what they can do. And so half of it is to raise awareness about what you can do. And then the management program actually tells people, here's how you can do it. And I was on board with the committee so that they would understand, here's how you do it, because our bankruptcy judges don't deal with student loans a lot. And so it's a system that's working here locally. And I think it'll be rolled out across the nation bit by bit. So, it's working.
Awesome. Well, I know we're running up on time. I do have one final question for you. I just wanted to know, how do you select the clients? I'm sure you get a ton of clients, and some people you can help or you can't help. But what is the selection criteria that of people that you can help?
Okay, great question. We're usually focused on those with at least $20,000 of debt. Not always, but usually. And initially, we want to talk with that person by telephone conference, Zoom, whatnot. And we charge $195. Okay, so we do have a consultation fee. We also have a guarantee that goes with that. And it's basically that if they hire us, it applies. So it's basically waived. If there's a situation during that time that we can tell them, here's what you need to do and here's how you do it, then they don't even need to hire an attorney. And then third, if we spend just a few minutes and we realize there's nothing there, you've already done everything you can, then we waive the fee. Because at that point, our client gets closure. Gets some certainty of mind that they know they're doing everything they can. So we do have that requirement. We don't really waive that because we just don't have time. We have a lot of people coming to us, and we're able to save them usually tens or even more, thousands of dollars. So, we're just looking for anyone with private or federal loans. Most situations have a fix. It varies, obviously quite a bit from depending on what school you went to, whether there's any fraud allegations, whether there's any disability. There's a lot of tips that we have with public service, with income-driven plans to lower the payment. And we also do a lot of litigation and debt settlement as well.
Awesome. Well, Ms. Arkovich, I appreciate your time today, and I'm sure my listeners understand student loan debt a little bit more. And we kind of knocked off some of the fairy dust about the concept of just everybody waking up one day and $60,000-$70,000 of student loan debt just disappearing off of their credit report. But I really appreciate your time today, and thank you very much.
I think it's helpful for your entrepreneur clients to kind of know, hey, if we can get these loans down, they'll have more money to invest in their own businesses.
Exactly.
So if it's well. So thank you for your time, Jamel. I appreciate the opportunity.
No problem. Thank you.